So we've been working on this project for over a year and we have a lot to share. This is our agenda for tonight. First, I'm going to give you a brief project overview. Then I'm going to talk more on the status of the updates that we're making to our significant natural resource inventory maps. But tonight, the majority of our presentation will be focused on the code concepts we're developing for the map natural resources. And we're so excited to learn about what your point of view is on those. I'd ask that you hold your questions to the end, and then when the time comes, raise your virtual hand to ask and wait to be called on to answer. You can also write out your questions in the Q&A tab. We won't have time to talk about individual properties tonight or situations. So if you have questions about that, we can talk to you individually at the conclusion of tonight or at a different time by emailing me at the address found on the project's webpage. So we wanted to make this an interactive event to get your feedback in real time and see what others in the virtual room are thinking. So we have a couple of spots where we'll have some questions during the presentation. We wanted to start this icebreaker with question to make sure that that technology works and to gauge how you're feeling before we start the presentation. And then I'll ask you again at the end to see how you're feeling. So at this time, point your phone at the QR code on the screen, and the survey questions will appear after a moment to give your response. And then once the QR code is linked on your phone, you'll not need to do it again for the other poll questions. This is completely anonymous, and it does take a moment to pull up though. So go ahead and try that out now. Okay. Great, we've got a very standard, a lot of different feelings here. Excited, let's see. Curious, everything is about the same. Oh, great. Hopefully by the end, we'll all be on a positive note. There we go. So there are some people who are a little uncertain or frustrated, so we'll just, hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions and make you feel a little bit better about the project. So let's see. So then what can I do? All right, now I'm going to talk a little bit about our project overview. The county's natural resources, like our streams and forests, provide essential habitat for fish and wildlife and are an important part of our land use planning process. State laws and statewide planning goal 5 require that we balance natural resource protection with other important land uses like housing and transportation. We've had some legal challenges to the county's significant natural resource regulations in the past that require us to make these changes to our regulations now to make them clear and objective. Oop, sorry. The Washington County Board of Commissioners asked us to update our natural resource inventory map for the urban unincorporated areas of the county. As part of this project, since they haven't been updated since the early 1980s, we're sharing our work to date, and we hope to hear your thoughts on the changes that we're working on to our draft regulations. So our significant natural resources follow the 3 main steps of the Goal 5 process, and these are outlined here on this screen. It begins with mapping and identifying the natural resources in the community, and in our case, we're starting with an existing natural resource inventory mapping in our urban area, and to consider what is still significant since our original mapping. As the inventory work is well underway, we move on to step 2, the analysis phase. Here's where we identify the major types of land uses that could conflict with the natural resources and do some analysis to balance the level of protection for the mapped resources with the different land uses. The final step is taking that analysis, weighing and balancing those impacts to the natural resources, and developing the policies and land use regulations for development that have taken those things into account. We've also been getting feedback from different stakeholders with different perspectives, including a technical advisory committee with representatives from various agencies, and meetings like this with the community where we speak about this project and learn what your point of view is and your opinion on our draft regulations. So here's the project schedule broken down by the various tasks within the Goal 5 process. You can see it's a bit iterative. We spent a lot of time on the updates to the inventory that feeds into our analysis and development of the regulations. Now I'll talk a little bit more about the inventory update. This map shows the urban area of Washington County, with the gray color showing the incorporated or city areas, and the blue and orange areas encompassing the urban unincorporated area of our study area. The blue area, what we call the map refinement area, is where we are doing the bulk of our mapping and analysis by our consultant team. And the orange areas, or the new community plan areas that cities have been have been more recently updated by the county through the planning process and included mapping our natural resources. We've started with the county's 1980s inventory and the Metro 2005 inventory. We're not doing any new inventory mapping at the direction of the board. So here's a comparison of the county and Metro mapping of the significant natural resources for the Bethany area. The county's significant natural resources map is on the left, with the water-related habitat we call riparian habitat and the wildlife habitat shown in green. The Metro map is to the right. These resources are similar, with riparian in shades of blue and upland in shades of green. The Metro natural resources are classified based on quality of habitat, which is a bit different from the county's inventory. Since the data is more recent and used more current technology, we consider it to be more accurate. After combining both Metro and county inventory maps of the natural resources, we will have a consolidated version of the same Bethany area. This map shows the natural resources called riparian habitat in blue and the areas of upland, the treed areas, often a bit further away from the riparian habitat, in shades of orange and yellow on this map. So through this update process, our consultant team looked at the mapped areas to determine where the natural resources are no longer considered significant from when they were originally mapped by the county and Metro. This includes developed areas where the habitat might be fragmented or the habitat patch has become very small. Other areas where properties had been through a land use review process and are developed. We took your comments and continued to do a manual review and data cleanup. Finally, we're including city or metro data for the areas added to the urban growth boundary since our original inventory was completed. The inventory maps will show the general location of the riparian and upland habitat areas and indicate that you could be subject to the natural resource regulations. I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. We're still taking comments on the inventory map if you still feel the map is not accurate. Our consultants will review your comments and recommend potential changes to the maps. Once complete, the map will be included in the documents to be reviewed by the Planning Commission and adopted by the Board of County Commissioners. We understand the map might not be perfect. Our new regulations will include a process to address map errors through the county's development review process, and um, it will verify the habitat boundaries that may be present.
Michelle, if I can just interrupt for just a moment, if you could just go a little slower in your
Oh,
delivery
sure.
for our interpreters, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Now we will move on to the code concepts we're working on. All of the information about the code concepts are still being worked out. We may not have all the answers at this point and are excited to get your feedback. Once our outreach is completed, we may make changes and write the draft code language that we will present before our Planning Commission and Board, who will make the ultimate decision about whether to adopt the code language that we have proposed. The draft code concepts that I'll be talking about tonight will apply to these natural resource areas identified on the county maps. As I mentioned earlier, the maps will identify the significant habitat called riparian habitat, like wetlands, rivers, streams, and ponds, and their wooded buffers, shown on this graphic in the center, and the upland wildlife habitat, those priority areas of forest and woodlands adjacent or upland to the riparian habitat that provide food, shelter, and mating sites for wildlife. First, very broadly, the county regulations will apply to riparian and upland wildlife habitat that are in a significant habitat boundary. The county had regulations for natural resources, but they were not clear and objective. These updated regulations must be clear and objective. I'll be following up with more details on the next few slides. But for riparian habitat, an overview is that the draft regulations are similar to what our current regulations are. Development is strictly limited near streams and stream banks and the water-related resources. If the development impacts a riparian habitat, clean water service requirements do apply, but some activities are allowed in these areas. For the upland wildlife habitat, the draft regulations will not change allowed uses, and they focus on tree retention. The code concept is to use tree protection as a means of protecting habitat areas. As we started to consider regulations for the natural resource areas, we turned to the idea of adding requirements that focused on retaining and replacing trees when development occurs. As many of you who live on or nearby these natural resources areas, trees provide an important habitat for wildlife and also other benefits to us as well. They clean our air and water and support our well-being. Trees are a foundational species. Whenever trees are planted, wildlife and other plants flourish and are used by many different species. Excuse me. When would the regulations apply? The regulations will apply when there is mapped significant habitat on your property and you are doing an activity that impacts the habitat, like building structures, removing trees, grading, or dividing the land. These actions are considered development. More specifically, development is defined in the county's rules as an intentional change to land, constructing or adding buildings, dividing the land into smaller parcels, like a subdivision, removing trees in the significant habitat areas, or changing the ground itself, like grading, paving, or excavating. Now, a few details about the riparian habitat regulations. And similar to the current rules we have, riparian habitat would be subject to a higher level of protection. Development is strictly limited, but some development activities are allowed. If a development impacts riparian habitat, clean water service requirements will likely apply. When vegetation is impacted, native, veg- native vegetation needs to be planted and invasive species are removed. There are some land use activities that are allowed within the riparian habitat, like transportation facilities, public utilities, trails, stream or bank restoration work, one single dwelling unit when there's very limited buildable areas on the property, and restoration or mitigation that would be required by another agency like the Department of State Lands or the Corps of Engineers. Next, I'll move on to the upland wildlife habitat regulations. Our intention with the upland wildlife habitat regulations is to balance the protection of habitat or trees with housing or other development needed by our communities. Our draft regulations will also need to show a path for development that's clear and objective. I'm first going to go over what we're thinking about for the clear and objective path. Keeping that in mind, the draft regulations will not change your allowed land uses. You will be able to develop your property. It includes standards for tree retention and replacement that apply when trees in the upland wildlife habitat are impacted by the development. The regulations will include a requirement to retain or preserve the trees, or you will need to replace a certain percentage of those trees, and a plan to include a simpler process for smaller projects on individual properties. Along with this clear and objective path, we're looking at alternatives for optional or discretionary approaches to the tree standards. We're considering some exceptions to the rules for trees in the upland habitat area that may apply to individual owners with natural resources on their property. These trees would not be regulated. They include trees that are hazardous, diseased, or dying, invasive tree species in tree farms or nurseries, trees that are under 6 inches in diameter, trees that are located within 10 feet of an existing house, on developed sites with only a very small amount of significant habitat area, or near underground utilities like water or sewer lines. So now for the next poll question. Oop, skipped ahead. Which of these potential exceptions to the tree requirements would you support? Can everybody see the screen? Let's see. So it looks like there's some support for many of these exceptions. We also have a removal of a healthy tree within the upland wildlife habitat area per year as another exception. I don't think I mentioned that on the previous slide. Great. Looks like most of the hazardous or diseased or dying trees show strong support for that, or invasive trees, many field trees close to the house or further away from the house, 20 feet, are also good candidates for an exception. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about how the tree regulations would work with an example of a property with mapped natural resources. Oops, somehow I got backed up a little bit there. The tree regulations apply to all areas within a significant habitat area, but are outside the verified riparian boundary, or the area where the upland habitat is located. So you can see that in the green area. The yellow area points to the outer significant habitat boundary for this drawing. Shown here, the tree regulations would apply to the green area, but not the blue hatched area where the verified riparian habitat boundary is located. So here's that same drawing showing the trees on the site. Some trees are shaded gray. Those are the regulated trees that I will talk about in the next slide. The other trees are outside the habitat boundary and will not be regulated. So you can see some of the trees in the riparian habitat area as well as the trees that are on that are outside the green significant habitat boundary area. So the first step in this process is to require a surveyor or an arborist to prepare the tree inventory of the regulated trees. Those trees are over 6 inches in diameter at breast height within the significant habitat boundary, but outside the verified habitat boundary shown in blue. So then a table would be submitted that tells us more about the trees and their characteristics like size, location, and health, and whether the applicant needs to remove the tree for development. Then each regulated tree gets a tree value score or points based on its size and species and location near the water. Certain trees will get assigned bonus points like native trees, larger trees, and select species. These trees are more important for habitat reasons and are encouraged to be retained. Then the applicant would need to do some math by adding up the total points from the tree inventory for the site that was prepared and subtract the points for the trees that are selected to be removed. If this percentage is less than the regulated requirement, the developer can plant new trees or preserve smaller existing trees on the site to make up the difference. This is all based on a point system that would be outlined in the regulations. So the county's current standards require mitigation for wildlife habitat that's impacted by development, but it's subjective and applied inconsistently for each development project. The code concept that we're proposing will provide a clear and objective method of calculating what mitigation is. We know that, especially in the urban area, development is encouraged and needed. So there's a balance with protecting our natural resources that we're trying to achieve. Metro Title 13 has requirements for upland habitat on lands that were added to the urban growth boundary after 2006 that are more strict than what we are considering for the pre-2006 unincorporated areas. So we're looking at areas inside the urban growth boundary that were added to the urban growth boundary before 2006 that we require retention or replacement of 50% of the total tree value points. But if areas were added to the urban growth boundary after 2006, we'd require retention or replacement of 80% of the total tree value points, and that's in keeping with the metro requirements. Here's an example of how a subdivision project may look from our examples earlier. It looks like some of the shaded regulated trees needed to be removed. Therefore, the developer will need to replant in the significant habitat area to meet the minimum point target for the trees that needed to be replaced. This is an example that used 50% of the tree values for how it would play out on the site. Now we'll move on to another question. So for most areas, we're considering requiring 50% of the tree value points on a development site to be retained or replaced. Do you believe this is about right, not enough, or too much? All right. Well, it appears to have some consensus. A few people are thinking it's not quite right. Some not enough, or some too much. We'll hold it open a little bit longer. Oh, and while we're kind of talking here, all of this information will be compiled with the different open house events that we're having, and we'll be giving these whole numbers to the board for just comparison. Great. So there's another question right in a row about what we've talked about here. We're considering allowing off-site tree replacement or a payment of a fee in lieu of replacing a tree if a development can't accommodate on-site those replacement trees. Which of these options would you support? Both, either off-site or neither one, or a fee in lieu? Okay. Looks like half, neither. Little split there, close to 50-50. Some interesting. All right. So in addition to the clear and objective path that we talked about earlier, we're considering allowing an alternative discretionary approach for mitigation for applicants that are not able or don't want to use the clear and objective tree preservation standards. Some of the alternatives we're just exploring at this time would be a certain amount of the significant habitat is placed in a canopy preservation area. A certain percentage of the tree canopy in that area must be maintained, and that would be based on the existing or planted trees. And then we'd have a deed restriction or maintenance for that canopy preservation area that's set aside. So moving on to our next steps for the project, our community forum, the next in-person one is going to be this Saturday, April 6th at the Cedar Hills Recreation Center. Our doors open at 1:30 and the presentation will be at 2 p.m. We'll be there'll be publication of our proposed regulations and inventory map. That's expected in late May or early June. Our ordinance hearing is expected to begin later this summer, and the board action is expected in October. With that, it's time for your questions and comments. We'd love to hear from you further. As I spoke earlier, we will be moderating the questions, raising your virtual hand, or put in your questions if you don't feel like saying them out loud in the question and answer, and we'll kind of open it up to questions at this time. All right. So are there?
And so, Michelle, there are 4 questions in the written questions, and I wonder if Todd is able to read those to you.
Yes, absolutely. The first one comes from Olivia. I apologize if I say this last name incorrect. Derradinger, who asks, upon viewing recent map, it appears that more of our property has been declared riparian habitat. What type of restitution is there for property owners whose land is no longer buildable but was when we purchased it, i.e. sellable?
So the inventory maps are just showing where identifying that there may be riparian area on your property. The regulations would just come into play when you are developing your property, which are similar to the way that we have it now, where you go through Clean Water Services to identify the area that's in the vegetated corridor boundary. And so there's not really any change to where the property is showing through the inventory. It's just kind of our best high level estimate of where the riparian area is. And so the regulations for when development happens are staying the same. There's not a change. And so it's up to you or the property owner to propose the development and have it reviewed. And that's basically the same process as it was before. We're not saying that your property's not developable because of the mapping change.
Michelle, the next question comes from was written by Hannah Spencer, who asks, fragmented habitat can still be valuable for wildlife, plant populations, and humans. Was fragmented habitat evaluated quantitatively before being removed?
And that was actually qualitatively.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think well, Ethan, our ecologist who worked on the inventory mapping, might be the best one to answer his process for looking at the various habitat patches and the fragmentation and the factors that he considered. Remember that we're looking at significant habitat, and so that's a pretty high bar in the evaluation of the Goal 5 resources.
Yeah, so I can add on to that, Michelle. It's a good question. The approach we took is that so fragmented habitats, we're talking about areas of upland habitat that are not connected to those riparian corridors. And so what we focused on were similar to what Metro looked at in their original mapping, some of their criteria. And so we focused on forested acres that were 2 acres or greater. And so we looked at, some of the areas that Metro previously mapped, but if development had reduced the size of those areas, then we may have removed them. If there were still enough that looked like it was a solid, chunk of 2-acre habitat, then we kept it. An exception to that is if there were mapped oak habitat. Oregon oak habitat is a Oregon conservation strategy habitat of concern throughout the state and in the county. And so for that, we looked at threshold was a half acre. It didn't mean that there needs to be a full half acre of oak habitat, but if there was, you know, a reasonable scoring of oak habitat within a half acre patch of forested habitat, then we kept it. And by scoring, I'm referring to there's a group called the Intertwine. It consists of various conservation entities, including both Metro and ODFW and various uh, groups that have done this oak mapping throughout the Portland metro area. And then they were able to map individual trees, and then they assigned a score to these groupings of trees. And we basically took the average score or higher in our study area. And so that's kind of what we focused on um, for keeping patches. There we go.
All right, Michelle, there was a comment during your presentation. It's not really a question. I guess I'll go ahead and read that. It's also from Olivia Derradinger. The developers who built next to us, Willowbrook, they did all those items on the previous slides, grading, excavating along the creek. Now there is a film of oil on the creek that wasn't there pre-built. So that was just a comment. The next question comes from Natalie McWilliams, who asked, will the in-person open house be the same as this one?
Yes, it will. The presentation will be the same. We do have some posters about the project in more detail about the code concepts, and we'll have staff available to answer questions in person. So that's the only difference. You can find those posters on the website, A Focus Look, if you look under the resources tab.
Great, Michelle, we have a hand that's been up that I'm gonna go to right now.
Okay.
That I'm actually, okay, it should be Charlene. Go ahead, Charlene.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hi, Charlene.
Hi, so I know there's no property specific questions, but my question is, if we have a question why our parcel of property or one abutting it is still in the protected area, how do we go about contacting someone? I have tried emailing the generic emails. I believe I've spoken to you. I've talked to multiple people. I'm getting 100% ignored on that, and also my significant natural resource issues on my property currently. How do we even go about giving feedback and getting answers?
Sure. So we're working through a lot of the comments and questions that people had about their property. If your property was reviewed, if you put in a comment in the property owner tool about whether you had questions about the location of the habitat on there, and that hasn't changed, it may have been reviewed. It just, we haven't gotten back to you about that resolution. So we'll be working through those final comments or explanations about what that status is. So, if that's kind of the method that you used, and I'm not sure about a specific conversation, but I would try again on the property owner tool and put in a comment about that, and we'll try to get your question about that completed and close that loop.
Michelle, the next question is from Susan Mates, who has a question about the polling questions that you asked. Can people answer these polling questions if they are not able to attend one of the forums?
I'm not sure how they're just kind of a live link at this time only. We haven't really put them on any that's an idea we could mull about and think through a little bit. And we'll take that suggestion under advisement, I guess.
I think people could always just on the website there is a spot for just telling us what you think, and so people could put answers in there too if they wanted.
Michelle, the next question comes from an anonymous attendee who says, "I am confused. Are there no tree regulations in the riparian areas?"
So in the riparian habitat areas, those are strictly regulated by Clean Water Services for the most part because they kind of manage the water quality and quantities. So they have requirements in their regulations that we adopt through when a development review project would come in the that has riparian habitat. So often it's more leave those trees alone, and so we're not duplicating the requirements of Clean Water Services in that case.
The next question comes from Susan Mates. You suggest that an arborist is needed to prepare the inventories. Will there be any requirements for these arborists?
Yes, some of the details aren't being worked out, but yes, that would be one of the things to have certified arborists or people with a certain level of expertise being able to provide us with that information. And that's one of those things to make sure that that's clear and objective will be one of the tasks that we have to comply with. But yes, definitely.
The next question is another anonymous attendee. How long will you welcome comments for the inventory map?
Well, that's a good question. We're going to be wrapping up our public outreach for the inventory this week, and I think I think I'm not sure what we'll have. We need time to prepare the report, so I'm thinking. Did we give a time on that, Teresa? I'm not
I
sure.
don't believe we've given a deadline, but it's a great question, and I think we probably should, and we probably should put that on our website to make it clear to people. I would think in the next week or two we would need to have that wrapped up and get all the comments so that we're able to respond to them before we finish the mapping. So we'll get that on our website, and I think when we do that, maybe we can send out a constant contact.
Michelle, Susan, go ahead.
I just said thanks.
Susan Mates asks, how do these regulations compare with those adopted in other areas?
Well, that's a kind of a tricky question because a lot of jurisdictions have, or some jurisdictions in Washington County have regulations for trees throughout the county. And we're one of the only jurisdictions that kind of started out in the 1980s with some regulations for wildlife habitat as a significant natural resource. I know that Beaverton is adopting some regulations now for the Cooper Mountain area that they need to comply with what Metro Title 13. So we're kind of, for the new UGB expansion areas, there are requirements for trees or upland wildlife habitat areas specifically. I haven't seen too many other jurisdictions that use tree points to kind of prioritize different qualities of the trees. Um, maybe that's a good question also for our lead consultants who's been digging into research on this issue. Kathy, if you'd like to tackle that question, that'd be great.
Yeah, that is a really good question. So we did look at a wide range of approaches and kind of peer city, did an evaluation of a number of peer cities in the metro region, but also elsewhere. I think we were looking for a balance. Obviously, we need to consider, as Michelle said, compliance with both Title 13 and with the Goal 5 planning rule, which is an Oregon administrative rule. So we were working within those frameworks. And we did, I think, again, look for a balance. As Michelle points out, the specific details of the approach are, as far as the tree points, is a somewhat of a unique solution to a specific goal, which was to find a clear and objective way to evaluate trees, but still prioritize certain tree types like oak and madrone, to prioritize larger trees, for example, to prioritize trees over 30 inches in diameter, and also to prioritize trees that had some proximity to a riparian area. So, and again, trying to find a way to do that in a clear and objective manner. And when we talk about clear and objective, it really just means that any two people come to the same conclusion, so that the regulations have to be measurable or quantitative. They cannot be qualitative. And so that was the solution. So I don't know if that helps answer the question. We did take a really close look at other jurisdictions looking for solutions. We have some things that are unique, but we think it represents a good balance given the regulatory framework.
Thanks, Kathy.
So Michael Anistel has the next written question, but he's also has his hand up. And so I'm going to allow him to talk here in a second, and I hope that he will ask the two questions that he has posted in the chat.
Yes. Hi. Yeah, I'm actually a California resident. My daughter owns a parcel and a house on 92nd Avenue. We just saw that they have a large riparian area that sweeps through the back third of almost, I don't know, 8 lots or something, all right there. Our concern is it's just a grass area. And in fact, neighbors who have smaller property are out there playing on there with their kids' ball and all that stuff. And our long-term goal was going to be to develop that and possibly my wife and I build a home back there. What is the restriction since there are no trees? And I keep hearing the tree point. What is a riparian area if there aren't any trees and actually not a river in that area?
Right. So
yeah, what is it exactly? I'm a little confused as to how they could claim it as a certain, because it's a broad term, right? Riparian area just seems it's within some area of water or within a certain distance from water. Is that true?
It's a little bit of both. Riparian areas or riparian habitat can include the actual streams and also the stream embankments. And usually kind of a strict distance is about 50 feet from the middle of the stream, but it can really change a lot depending on slope and topography, is how it's kind of just that broad brush of what a definition of a riparian habitat area includes. It could be surrounding a wetland. It could be part of a wetland. It could be areas that don't have any stream all the time, like those boggy areas, perhaps. But our inventory that we have, we actually didn't go out. You might not know this, but we didn't actually go out to your property and assess where the riparian habitat is. It's kind of a GIS exercise at a high level to say this might be where a stream is, and the areas around it might include some riparian habitat. And there wouldn't be any requirements for you on the property until you chose to develop your property. And when that happens, you apply to the county, and the regulations that we look at are from Clean Water Services, and they require like an actual survey of someone going out there and measuring where the riparian habitat is based on those factors of topography and slope and location. And they would kind of tell us, and you would tell us through your survey work where that is, and that would be called the vegetated corridor. So that would be the area that that Clean Water Services would have the regulations and some strict limits on what you can do in that particular area. And if you don't have trees within the riparian habitat that's outside of that boundary, but still in the significant habitat boundary, there isn't any, it's all based on the existing trees. So if there's not trees there, then those wouldn't be subject to our regulations as it's written, as it's proposed right now.
Okay, so when you're talking about the subject to restrictions, you mean removal of certain species of trees? Yeah, this looks like this house was built in 1937, so it looks like this has been an orchard for who knows how long, and the back half has always been grass, and it has to be mowed several times a year, which thankfully the neighbor has a lawn tractor. But I want to put a home right on the edge of it and then enjoy looking at that lawn in my golden years, so to speak. So what I wanted to know is there a chance that the county could in fact develop what is maybe a seasonal runoff from a golf course or something? Could they actually build it into a canal, so to speak, to make the water stay within a 6 to 10 foot? I've never seen water there, and I've been there during these major storms. It's never flowed anywhere, but it may be very saturated at the last 10 feet. But we're losing approximately 100 feet of property of a 300-foot house property. That's a lot, you know.
I wouldn't venture to guess to know your exact circumstances until someone goes out and does the actual survey and looks at the property and makes application to Clean Water Services or the county to know what's going on with your property and where the precise location of the riparian habitat is located. So that you could have that done to ease your mind, but that often changes, and it only is applicable when you come in to develop. So we would just look at it when you're developing it.
Okay, but yeah, my only concern is that is a huge consideration as to whether or not we would want to develop it. I wouldn't want to plan that is going. Yeah, the expense. So what I'm thinking, perhaps, as this process moves forward, is there a consultant that can come to the property to examine it, or are we way away from that phase yet? As far as it's a major swath of land,
a huge economic expense on that landowner.
Yeah,
they want to build, is what you're doing.
Yeah, we just want to know.
It wasn't like that when the property was purchased, and now all of a sudden there's all these new
That's my wife, by the way.
regulations. Yeah, I'm the wife.
Every property in Washington County that comes in for development, regardless of whether it's on a Goal 5 property or not, has to have have a pre-screen by Clean Water Services, and those rules control. If we took the blue area off your map, you would still be subject to those same requirements. It's a countywide consideration.
Yeah, part of the building.
So it's what they say, it's what they find through a process where you have a consult. If you want to develop, you make that application to them using your environmental consultant.
Okay, let's say we do that.
Michelle, this is Todd. I'm just going to jump in here really quick. We have a long list of questions,
Oh,
and
sure.
I hope that we
Thank
could
you.
perhaps
Yeah.
continue this via email.
I can totally talk to you. Send me an email or something if you have further questions, or I can point you to the Clean Water Service design and construction standards if that would be useful to you at all.
Thanks, Michelle. The next question comes from Susan Mates. What are the requirements for mitigation? For example, could a large mature Doug fir tree be mitigated with a new sapling?
Well, the regulations as we're proposing them are not like a one-to-one tree replacement. It's based on a point system. So a large Doug tree would get a certain number of points based on the size of the tree. And depending on whether there were other trees on the property, if there were the same number of Doug firs, like let's say there were 5 Doug firs on the property and one was needing removal that within the significant habitat area, then there would likely be no need to replace that particular tree because they would be retaining over half of their tree value points, so to speak. It would only come into play depending on the if the applicant could not meet the threshold of 50% of the points, achieving certain points. So it's not a tree for tree replacement. In some cases, if there were Doug firs that needed to be replaced to get to the 50%, it would be based on each inch of the tree. So one big large Douglas fir may need to have multiple trees to get to that threshold to achieve the points.
Thanks, Michelle. The next question comes from Susan Mates. Where are the mitigation sites and how can we find out more about them?
Well, the regulations are just being proposed now. The mitigation sites would be on the properties that right now we're proposing on-site mitigation. We may have off-site mitigation, but that hasn't been decided or really even evaluated at this point. So right now, mitigation would occur on the developed site, on the site that's proposing development.
Great. And then Susan has one more question. What does it mean that larger trees are encouraged to be retained?
Sure. So like, let's use your example of the large Doug fir at, let's say it's a 30-inch diameter tree. Well, that's a lot, and then it's close to the water. So there would be some bumping up of the number of points that Doug fir is worth. And if an applicant needed to remove that tree, there would be a lot of replanting that may need to happen. So that's how larger trees are encouraged to be retained, because you get to keep a lot of points for retaining that tree. It's worth a lot of kind of bonus points to make sure that they try to keep that tree versus smaller trees that could be removed would not get you closer to that 50% threshold that a large Doug fir might.
Great. The next question comes from anonymous attendee. How will tree removal be monitored? We lost many in our January storms and they were natural.
Well, there are, we have aerial photography, I think will be one way. We'll be relying on arborist reports and those kind of changes over time to use the different photographs. And I'm not sure how else we'll be monitoring when applicants come in for and conducting that inventory and that monitoring process. They'll attest that these are the trees that are here, and it will go through the development review process. They have certain licensors that they need to uphold to be truthful about what they're proposing, and sites are inspected by the building crew and making sure everything is where they say it's going to be. So there's a lot of communication through the land use process before the sites are finalized.
Great. We have an anonymous attendee who asks, how are you reaching out to arborists and tree removal services?
Well, we're working with our technical advisory committee right now. We're just to the point where we have our code concepts enough so that we can talk and share that information with you. We have met with a group of developers and arborists and people that prepare those natural resource reports to get their feedback on some of the ideas that they have to share with our clear and objective path. So they've been commenting to us and we've been working with them. We'll probably have some follow-up meetings and talking with more of the experts in the field as well as we get closer to filing our ordinance.
Great. Sharon S. has her hand up, and so I'm going to allow her to talk.
Hi, Sharon.
Hi, thank you. My question well, I have a few, I'm sorry, refers to the riparian areas. The first one in reference to the gentleman who was asking about developing his property or building a property on what looks like not really a riparian area. I believe that the riparian areas are mostly established by the flood zone maps. Do you know if that's correct?
In part, they might be the FEMA floodplain maps, but they're a little different. Clean Water Services uses a combination of maps to identify the exact location of the vegetated corridor. So, and it really does change over time. So I'm not exactly sure. I don't think it's exclusive of the floodplain maps.
The next question comes from Charlene, who wrote, you mentioned at the beginning of the meeting that there would be people available to ask specific property related questions. Will that be possible after this meeting or to set up an appointment to do so?
I think it would be best to set up an appointment to talk more about your property specifically, and that way we can look at the maps and take the time to set like more one-on-one. I might have misspoke a little bit about that availability at the end of this meeting tonight.
And so, Michelle, if they'd like to do that, how would you like people to let you know? Do you want that them to email you, or how do you want them to do that?
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, feel free to email me at Michelle __ Miller, MILLER at Washington County org.gov, and that is on the Focus Look web page too. At the bottom of the page is my contact information. Send me an email.
Michelle, anonymous attendee, asks, who will be responsible for enforcement of these regulations in these areas?
So we have a code enforcement, and it is complaint driven, and so that the county will be depending on if the regulation is in violation, and doing the investigations for any issues that come up after the development has been finalized. Do you have anything to add to that, Teresa?
No, I believe, Clean Water Services would be doing it for their regulations. And so anything that was in the riparian area that they required, any replanting or anything, that they would do that enforcement. And yeah, otherwise, as Michelle said, the county our enforcement is on a complaint basis. And we usually look at the kind of life safety complaints first. So these would be a lower level of complaint, but would eventually be looked at.
So Tara Atkins Brown has the next written question. We had to remove 2 trees in the mapped riparian area due to uprooting in the last storm, which was a large expense to us. Clean Water Services informed us that we were responsible for this area as we and our neighbors were owners of this shared lot. My 2 questions. 1, in the future, who pays for such expenses and manages tree death and uprooting? And 2, my neighbors were not informed about the impact with our common area. When will they be informed? And I'm happy to repeat those if needed.
Okay, so the first, yes, could you repeat the first part is who's responsible for?
Who pays for the expenses and manages tree death and uprooting?
The trees are all, whoever owns the property that the tree is located on is responsible for the care of the tree and that removal. Regarding the notification of common ownership, that would be if you have a home, is it under homeowners association? So that would be one way to notify the property owners in common ownership responsible for that. And that would be a civil matter.
Thank you. The next question comes from an anonymous attendee. Snags can be wildlife habitat. Any point value for these?
For what?
Snags, SNAGS.
Oh, sure. But they do have value in the riparian area, I know, and we're not counting those trees. However, in our process, we're just counting healthy trees 6 inches or greater in size. So the snags wouldn't count for. They count as habitat, but they don't count in our point system, unfortunately.
The next question comes from Amber Waters. Could you please comment on tree points when it comes to homeowner planting specific high point species of trees versus existing trees? Would a homeowner be incentivized to avoid planting high point trees?
I think it's actually the opposite. We would be encouraging people to plant high point trees, and the high point trees that we're looking at are certain species. So there's the Oregon white oak, I believe the Willamette Valley ponderosa pine, and the arbutus. So those are trees that have particular habitat value, and we would be giving extra points to those if they were planted. They're not necessarily super easy to plant or to grow those particular species, but and then trees that would be close to the riparian area. If you were planting new trees there, that would also have a little extra value. I think those are the two, because you couldn't plant really large trees. So certain species and closer to wildlife, to the riparian habitat, would get extra value, and that's how we would encourage people to.
And we're not necessarily we are not regulating trees within a certain distance of your house. So we encourage you to plant native trees for the benefits that Teresa talked about, and we talked about in our presentation, but they would likely be exempt from our regulations. We wouldn't be necessarily regulating them either way. So.
And Kathy, did you want to add anything? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Apologies. you basically covered it. I was just going to say, I think it is an opportunity where if you're planting trees in a location that you want them, and you're planting higher value trees, as you mentioned, the white oak, the ponderosa pine, the madrone, those could be future mitigation trees, right? You have them where you want them. And if you had other trees that you were thinking, okay, these are not in the right location, those might serve as future mitigation trees for you. So that's another opportunity, and I think hopefully encourages people to plant those.
Great. The next question comes from Charlene. Has this project taken into account that large Doug fir trees, for example, in close proximity to homes can be very dangerous? For example, my home has numerous trees over 120 feet within 30 feet. This puts a very big burden on property owners in this situation. Has this been considered?
I think we've heard a lot from people about concern, especially after the trees that have fallen this year in particular. This year it's been pretty windy. That was one of the reasons we're having the exceptions around the in proximity to the house, and hazardous, diseased, and dying are exceptions. So there's a few considerations taking into account, but thinking about that balance. What are your thoughts on that? We haven't really landed on other options.
Any other thoughts, Teresa or Kathy?
Well, I'll jump in on that. Then I think we are looking at different exceptions, again, within a certain distance of the house, or perhaps allowing a certain amount of disturbance area so that it isn't even a question about trees. And again, we're saying, okay, here's what regulated trees are. And then of those, some trees are not regulated, and even though they otherwise meet the definition, and that would be things like trees that are within proximity to a house, or we could say, and it's just another way we're thinking about it as we're drafting these regulations and interested in hearing from people about this, allowing just a disturbance area for an existing dwelling. So if you wanted to use it for your house and your driveway, or if you wanted to use it for your landscape area, it wouldn't matter. You would just have a certain amount of disturbance area within which the trees would not be regulated. And so that's just another idea. And again, we're in the drafting stage, and we're talking to people early in this process to get insights. But those are some ideas that we're thinking about as we draft this.
So Charlene, who asked the last question, has her hand up right now. And so I am going to allow her to talk.
Thank you. Can you hear me? So I know one of the goals on these rules is to make this much more objective and not subjective. One particular issue, people keep mentioning hazardous trees. Is that going to be defined in some way? I mean, for example, the current rules or the prior rules, it seemed to have accepted hazardous trees, or I think it said trees posing an immediate threat to property or life or something like that, were accepted from the rules. But even in that situation, your county planners are asking property owners to get arborist reports, which are $1,000, and send them in before they quote unquote okay it or not, which is tantamount to getting a permit. And in my situation, I have been dealing with them for 2 rotten trees very close to my house for well over a month. And, spending the extra money for a report for something that's not even supposed to require that. And when I asked for a definition to hazardous, which is a term you're still using, they just simply they just ghosted my emails. Are those problems going to be fixed under the new rules?
Well, Charlene, you really identified a lot of some of the issues that we have with clear and objective. It's really a challenge to make sure that the definitions also have to be clear and objective. So if We're going to do our best to have a good definition that's clear and objective and easy to understand so that it will withstand legal scrutiny. But it will be a challenge to kind of come up with a definition that we can rely on.
The next question comes from an anonymous attendee. We have been investing in sweat and financial equity to help avert tree death and restore with natives the area. Is there a tax benefit, educational resources, or other support property owners will receive for such efforts?
Good. Well, thank you for your stewardship. Well, we're on the kind of the regulatory scheme right now of for development, and I'm not sure about some of those other incentives that are available through the county at least. And I know that the Extension Service offers some assistance. Teresa or Kathy, do you have any other suggestions for this question?
Oh, go ahead, Kathy, if you have thoughts.
No, I was going to say, I thought Michelle's answer covered it. I don't think I have anything to add on that, but an interesting idea, and we can look at them more closely.
Yeah, I know there are some other organizations that do have more resources, and we probably could post some of them on our website. A lot of the soil and water conservation districts have resources. I know we have a backyard wildlife habitat, and so there is that program. So we could post some of that information on our website, but the county planning department doesn't take care of those resources. So it would be other agencies, but we could possibly link to them.
We have Sharon S. who has her virtual hand up, so I'm going to allow her to talk right now. Go ahead, Sharon.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment or ask a question about the hazardous trees. I would really encourage after our ice storm in January to that there be really clear definitions about this. We had 5 neighbor trees fall on our property, and it was our responsibility to clean those up. We have asked a neighbor to remove one of the same species of trees that fell, and they've said no because the county said they can't. So if I understand the regulations correctly, I would have to get an arborist report and submit that. In light of the devastation that happened in January, I just would really encourage this process to take a clear look at determining hazard trees, how to remove them. I guess that's really all I want to say about it. Thank you.
Sorry for your struggles. That sounds awful. And we are working to make it a little better about our definitions. And thanks for your comments about that. And it's something that we're working on.
So those are all the questions that we have in the chat, and I don't see anybody with their hand up, so I just want to give an opportunity for anybody else that has any questions. We did get a message about Charlene, one of our previous questioners, not having had her question answered, but I'm not sure exactly what went unanswered. So if anybody has any thoughts, if you just want to raise your hand, any questions, now would be a great time to do so. There we go.
Michelle, it might be a good time to ask your final poll question.
Well, just
right.
Oh, sorry, there is another question there.
We do. We have Michael and Estelle is back. Go ahead, Michael. Michael,
Are you talking?
Yes, I was talking. I forgot to hit unmute. I'm technically challenged. Just wanted to kind of finish my thought about, it sounds like the county does not ever intend to be financially responsible for any type of maintenance within the riparian area. Is that correct?
Right, that's Clean Water Services.
So, so the Clean Water Services would not, let's say a large tree fell on that property, it's always going to be the homeowner's responsibility to clean that up, even though it may cause potential fire hazard or whatever, erosion or anything like that. I'm just curious, it sounds like we're going to get the restriction, but no real financial benefit. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you.
Well, you know, like for instance, the grass would be 3 feet tall back there if nobody maintained it. But yet, I'm just, you know, not trying to be an antagonist, but if we're going to pay taxes on it and be limited on its use, it seems to me that the county should be, or somebody should be able to take care of issues regarding drainage or wildlife overgrowth or things like that. Just trying to see where the county.
We're not asking anything of you at this point, right? You would be asking to develop it, and that's when the
restrictions occur. Right. Yeah. No, I'm just saying it sounds like, because that question's come up a few times where people have said, well, who's going to maintain it, or who's, and it sounds like it's still your property. You're still financially responsible for it. There just may be some restrictions regarding developing.
Right, and for riparian areas, it's not. We're not changing those rules. That's what the rules have been since 2005.
Yeah, just when I bought it, I didn't have any restrictions, and now it sounds like, yeah, it may have been on a map a long time ago, but it's nothing that's, you know, it's been there. You can see for 100 years. There's others 6 properties that all look the same. One person to the right has built 3 homes on the same size property, and now he may have done it just in time. It sounds like, perhaps.
Well, I like I said, I'd be happy to talk with you offline about this and go over your exact property and your questions, and maybe look at the maps and point you in the direction of kind of what.
Yeah, what might be possible is all we're looking for. Yeah, just we're not going to do anything for probably years, and that's our concern, is that it may not be possible within a few years if the rules continue to grow or change. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So now I'm gonna do. Let's have our last question here. See if how everyone is feeling. We have our last poll question. Oh, shoot. Here we go. Sorry, it's a little finicky here about getting to the, there we go. All right, now you've heard more about our project and our concepts for how the regulations will work. How are you feeling about this topic now, after hearing everything? So, don't hold back. I see you're not. All right, there's still some frustrations out there. Okay. Great. Well, some a little bit still uncertain. I'm wondering. Okay, hopeful and frustrated and uncertain. Well, I hope those that are frustrated, I hope you can get in contact with me, and I hope to try to answer your questions a little bit in more detail or be more specific about where we're headed. And I'd also say continue to follow the process. Our regulations are still in flux and could change with could change based on conversations and more research on getting our code in good shape for filing our ordinance. So it's not too late to let your feelings be known. And with that, I think although it's a little bit early, I think we're done with the questions and answers, and I would be signing off. Encourage you to check out the website and sign up for the interested parties if you haven't done so already. And thank you so much for sharing your evening with us and sharing your thoughts about this project. Thank you.
And Michelle, people have asked about getting a copy of the recording, and so this will be available on our website within a couple days,
Right.
if not sooner.
Friday.
So,
Yeah, I think
so
Friday.
please check there. Yeah.
Sorry if I must have missed that.
No, there was just a last question that was asked.
Oh, nice. All right, with that, Chuck, I think we're done.
Okay.